It is May 1940. Deep in the Ardennes forest, a German panzer driver grips the controls of his tank. He has been awake for 3 consecutive days and nights. By every law of human biology, he should be unconscious, collapsed from sheer exhaustion. But he is not sleeping. He is not even tired. His heart is pounding, his pupils are dilated, and he feels a terrifying, godlike sense of invincibility. He is not powered by patriotism or adrenaline. He is powered by a small round pill wrapped in foil, issued to him by his military doctor. The pill is labeled Pervitin. Today, we know it by a different name: methamphetamine. This is not a story about a street crime. It is the history of a chemical weapon designed to conquer the biological limit of fatigue. A weapon that allows us to borrow energy from the future at a devastating interest rate. Chapter 1. The Crystal. The Chemist. To find the origins of the White Demon, we must look far beyond the modern superlabs of the cartels. We must travel back to a time when chemistry was the most promising frontier of human progress. The story does not begin with a crime. It begins with a plant. For over 5,000 years, Chinese medicine had utilized a shrub known as ma huang, or ephedra. Physicians brewed it into teas to treat asthma and congestion because it acted as a powerful bronchial dilator. But as the 19th century embraced the Industrial Revolution, scientists were no longer content with boiling leaves. They wanted to isolate the essence. They wanted the pure molecule. In 1887, a Romanian chemist named Lazar Edeleanu, working at the University of Berlin, became the first human to synthesize a compound he called phenylisopropylamine. We know it today as amphetamine. Edeleanu was a brilliant scientist, yet in a twist of historical irony, he found the compound uninteresting. It didn't seem to have a specific medical use, so he documented his findings and placed the formula on a shelf, where it gathered dust for decades. The world was not yet ready for speed. The true acceleration began in Japan. In 1893, the renowned chemist Nagai Nagayoshi successfully isolated the active ingredient in the ephedra plant, which he named ephedrine. While experimenting with this structure to create a better asthma medication, he synthesized a derivative that was structurally similar to Edeleanu's amphetamine, but with a crucial, deadly modification. He added a methyl group to the molecule. This was the birth of methamphetamine. At this stage, however, it was merely a liquid oil, volatile, and difficult to mass produce. It remained a scientific curiosity until 1919, when another Japanese chemist, Akira Ogata, changed history with a single reduction reaction. Ogata discovered that by using red phosphorus and iodine, he could remove the oxygen atom from the ephedrine molecule more efficiently. The result was no longer a liquid. It was a stable, water-soluble, white crystalline powder, methamphetamine hydrochloride. This was the moment the crystal was born. The addition of that methyl group, the meth in methamphetamine, was not just a chemical triviality. It acted as a lipid-soluble key, allowing the drug to cross the blood-brain barrier much faster and more violently than ordinary amphetamine. Yet even then, no one screamed, "Poison." The medical community saw a miracle. In the United States, the pharmaceutical company SmithKline French began selling a volatile base form of the drug in 1932 under the trade name Benzedrine. It wasn't sold in back alleys. It was sold in pharmacies as an over-the-counter inhaler for stuffy noses. The logic was sound. The drug was a potent vasoconstrictor, shrinking swollen blood vessels to allow airflow. But users quickly discovered that if they cracked open the inhaler and swallowed the paper strip inside, they didn't just breathe better. They felt like gods. By the late 1930s, the scientific community had unlocked the power of pure energy, believing they had tamed nature. They had no idea they had actually synthesized a predator. Chapter 2. The Blitzkrieg Pill. If the laboratory gave birth to the crystal, the war gave it a purpose. In 1937, Dr. Fritz Hauschild, the chief pharmacologist at the Temmler-Werke Company in Berlin, was impressed by the effects of American Benzedrine at the Olympic Games. He wanted to create a German rival. He went back to the old Japanese formula, refined the synthesis, and patented the result under a name that would become infamous: Pervitin. Initially, this was not a military secret. Pervitin was marketed to the German public as a commercially available alertness aid, sold in pharmacies to tired housewives, struggling students, and night shift workers. There were even boxed chocolates laced with methamphetamine, marketed to women to help them perform household chores with vigorous enthusiasm. But the drug's true destiny lay not in the kitchen, but on the battlefield. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, military doctors noticed that Pervitin allowed soldiers to march endlessly without feeling pain or fear. By the time the Wehrmacht turned its gaze toward France in 1940, the drug had been systematized. The German High Command issued the Stimulant Decree, ordering the mass production of Pervitin for the army. Between April and July of 1940, over 35 million tablets were shipped to the front lines. This pharmaceutical supply chain is the missing piece of the puzzle in understanding the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. Historians often attribute the fall of France to superior German tanks and tactics. While true, these machines were operated by biological organisms that required sleep. The strategy of the Blitzkrieg, punching through enemy lines and driving deep into territory without pausing, was theoretically impossible because the drivers would eventually pass out. Methamphetamine removed this biological barrier. General Heinz Guderian's panzer divisions reportedly drove for 3 days and 3 nights without stopping. The French and British troops, fighting on natural sleep cycles, was simply overrun by an enemy that did not sleep. The drug shut down the body's natural warning systems, suppressing hunger, thirst, and the desperate need for rest, replacing them with a cold, chemical aggression. Across the globe, Imperial Japan was weaponizing the same molecule under the brand name Philippon. The name was derived from the Greek words Philipponos, meaning love of work. In Japan, the drug was initially used to keep factory workers awake, to meet impossible production quotas for ships and planes. As the war turned desperate, it was fed to soldiers and, most tragically, to the kamikaze pilots. Before their one-way missions, pilots were given high-dose injections of Philippon to override their survival instincts and induce a state of focused fixation on their targets. However, biology eventually demanded its price. By 1941, the cracks were appearing. German medical officers began reporting strange symptoms: soldiers firing weapons at imaginary enemies, heart failures in young men, and entire units collapsing into catatonic exhaustion once the drug wore off. The miracle pill was creating an army of paranoid addicts. The High Command tried to restrict its use, declaring it an addictive opioid-like substance, but the Pandora's box was open. The soldiers were hooked, and the black market for Pervitin thrived in the trenches until the bitter end. The Blitzkrieg was fueled by crystal, and the crash was inevitable. Chapter 3. Mother's Little Helper. The Dr. Feelgoods. When the guns fell silent in 1945, the chemical factories did not. In the ruins of post-war Japan, the military sat on a mountain of surplus Philippine injections destined for kamikaze pilots who never flew and factory workers who no longer had quotas. Instead of destroying the stockpile, pharmaceutical companies flooded the civilian market. The result was the world's first methamphetamine epidemic. By the early 1950s, over 5% of the Japanese population, including artists, writers, and laborers, were addicted to what they called Hirapan. But while Japan battled a visible public health crisis, the United States was busy packaging the stimulant as a legitimate lifestyle product. In the Eisenhower era, methamphetamine was not seen as a demon. It was a diet aid. Pharmaceutical giants synthesized pills like Obitrol and Methadone, marketing them aggressively to the American housewife. They promised rapid weight loss and boundless energy for cleaning, cooking, and child-rearing. It was the era of mother's little helper, where being thin and productive was a social mandate. And the chemistry set in the medicine cabinet made it possible. But the drug also climbed the highest ladders of power. Enter Dr. Max Jacobson, a German émigré physician in New York, who became known to history as Dr. Feelgood. Jacobson treated the cultural elite, from Truman Capote to Marilyn Monroe, with his mysterious miracle tissue regenerator injections. He claimed they were a proprietary cocktail of vitamins, enzymes, and animal placenta. In reality, the primary active ingredient was high-dose methamphetamine. His most famous patient was President John F. Kennedy. During the tense 1961 Vienna summit with Nikita Khrushchev, Kennedy was suffering from debilitating back pain and fatigue. Jacobson injected the president with meth to keep him upright. When an aide warned Kennedy about the potential risks of Jacobson's concoctions, Kennedy famously replied, "I don't care if it's horse. Piss. It works." The leader of the free world negotiated the height of the Cold War while chemically enhanced. However, the golden age of legal speed could not last. As the counterculture of the 1960s embraced the drug, mixing it with the psychedelic revolution, the government finally cracked down. The Controlled Substances Act of 1970 severely restricted medical production, making pills like Obitrol difficult to obtain. This regulation had an unintended, catastrophic consequence. When Big Pharma was forced out, the outlaw biker gangs moved in. The synthesis of methamphetamine shifted from sterile laboratories to dirty bathtubs and rural trailer parks. The motorcycle gangs utilized a primitive chemical method known as the P2P cook, using phenyl 2-propanone. This resulted in a product that was often impure, toxic, and smelled distinctly of cat urine. The drug had lost its white-collar legitimacy. By the mid-1970s, it had ceased to be a medicine for presidents and housewives and had completed its transformation into a gritty, destructive street drug, setting the stage for the modern nightmare. Chapter 4. The Anatomy of Addiction. To understand why this chemical conquered the world, we must look inside the human skull. Methamphetamine is a molecular burglar. It is structurally nearly identical to dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation, pleasure, and the survival instinct to repeat beneficial behaviors. Under normal conditions, neurons release dopamine in controlled bursts. When you eat a delicious meal, your brain releases about 50 units. When you engage in sexual reproduction, it releases about 100. This is nature's way of rewarding behaviors that keep the species alive. Methamphetamine ignores these biological safety limits. It doesn't just mimic dopamine. It reverses the transporter pumps in the neurons, forcing the brain to dump its entire supply at once. The result is a release of approximately 1,200 units of dopamine. This is not merely a high, it is a biological fraud. It tricks the brain into believing that taking the drug is 12 times more important for survival than food, water, or reproduction combined. The user feels an immediate, intense rush of euphoria and godlike confidence because their reward system has been completely hijacked. But the brain is a self-regulating system. Faced with this toxic tidal wave, it initiates a scorched earth policy to protect itself. It aggressively prunes away its own dopamine receptors to dampen the overwhelming noise. This is the physiological mechanics of tolerance and addiction. When the drug finally wears off, the user is left with a brain that has physically lost the machinery to feel pleasure. This state is called anhedonia. A recovering addict doesn't just feel sad. They feel an absolute, hollow emptiness. The things that used to bring joy, a sunset, a hug, a good meal, no longer register. The destruction is not limited to the mind. It ravages the body with equal cruelty. We have all seen the horrifying meth mouth, characterized by black, rotting teeth. Popular culture often attributes this to the user simply eating too much sugar or lacking hygiene. The medical reality is far more disturbing. Methamphetamine is a powerful vasoconstrictor. It violently shrinks the blood vessels throughout the body. This cuts off the blood supply to the gums and oral tissue, causing them to slowly die and rot from the lack of oxygen and nutrients. Simultaneously, the drug completely dries up the salivary glands, a condition called xerostomia. Saliva is the mouth's natural defense against acid and bacteria. Without it, the teeth dissolve. Combined with the compulsive grinding of the jaw, bruxism, common in users, the mouth literally destroys itself from the inside out. The physical decay is a visible, rotting echo of the neurological ruin happening upstairs. Chapter 5. The Superlab Era. The evolution of the drug took a sharp industrial turn in the 1980s. Until this point, the biker meth, made with the P2P method, was chemically flawed. It produced a racemic mixture, 50-D-methamphetamine, the potent mind-altering isomer, and 50-L-methamphetamine, a weaker isomer that mostly just increased heart rate and physical jitters. It was a dirty high. But underground chemists soon rediscovered the lesson of Nagai Nagayoshi from a century earlier. If you start with ephedrine or pseudoephedrine, the active ingredient in common over-the-counter cold medicines, you are already halfway there. Because pseudoephedrine is a chiral molecule that already possesses the correct orientation, reducing it yields 100 pure D-methamphetamine. This was not just a stronger drug, it was a cleaner, more targeted weapon for the brain. This chemical realization coincided with a shift in geopolitical power. As the United States tightened regulations on domestic chemical sales, organized crime syndicates, particularly the Amezcua brothers of the Colima cartel in Mexico, realized they could import tons of pure ephedrine powder legally from overseas suppliers in Europe and Asia, disguised as pharmaceutical shipments. This marked the death of the bathtub cook and the birth of the superlab. These were not small kitchens. They were massive, factory-scale operations hidden in the deserts or jungles, capable of producing hundreds of pounds of product in a single cook. They utilized advanced synthesis methods, such as the red phosphorus method or the birch reduction, using anhydrous ammonia stolen from fertilizer tanks, to strip the oxygen from the precursor molecules at an industrial pace. The final evolution was the form of the drug itself. For decades, speed had been a powder, usually snorted or injected. But the superlabs perfected the crystallization process, creating large, translucent shards of methamphetamine hydrochloride, known on the street as ice or crystal. This was a game changer for delivery. Because the crystal was pure enough to be vaporized without burning, it could be smoked. When smoked, the drug enters the bloodstream through the massive surface area of the lungs, bypassing the liver's filtration and hitting the brain in less than 8 seconds. This near-instantaneous onset mimicked the rush of injection without the stigma of needles, drastically lowering the barrier to entry for new users. The superlabs had achieved the capitalist ideal. They created a product that was higher in purity, lower in production cost, and more addictive than anything that had come before. By the 1990s, the price of meth had plummeted while its potency skyrocketed, flooding the streets with a supply that was virtually limitless, turning a niche subculture problem into a global catastrophe. From the sterile laboratories of 19th-century Berlin to the frozen tank cockpits of the Eastern Front, and finally to the shattered lives of the modern epidemic, the story of methamphetamine is a tragedy of unintended consequences. We created this molecule to conquer sleep and fatigue, to make soldiers invincible and workers tireless. We believed we had cheated biology. But we forgot the fundamental law of nature. Energy cannot be created from nothing. Methamphetamine does not give you energy. It allows you to steal it from your own future. It is a loan taken out against your sanity, your health, and your soul. And eventually, the chemical banker always returns to collect the debt, leaving behind only bankruptcy and silence. The white demon promised us the power of gods, but it only delivered the agony of ghosts. If you want to uncover more dark files from history, subscribe to the 9 p.m. Historian.